Anyway, we're jumping into Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind for this morning. And we're on, in this book, page 102, starting on a paragraph that says, your master's direct statement. And yes. Your master's direct statement may not be only in words. His behavior is likewise his way of expressing himself. In Zen, we put emphasis on demeanor or behavior. By behavior, we do not mean a particular way that you ought to behave, but rather the natural expression of yourself. You know, he's been hovering around this idea of life as expression, practice as expression, and the expression of self. And of course, when he's talking about the expression of self, he's not talking about our decorated idea of a body-mind self. He's talking about the real self, the genuine self, that we begin expressing from here and not from here. You know, so we're not head oriented we're not coming out of mind with calculating our actions and calculating our desires and calculating our getting and grabbing and gaining and fixing, and it's not living up here. This isn't the expression he's talking about. He's not talking about expressing your moods, expressing your, needs, your desires, your angers. He's not talking about those things, because he's wanting us to move into the heart, the place where we practice, the place where we worship, the place that's the closest possible to the unchanging reality of ourself. And that when it manifests, that manifests a perfect human being, which basically is God in action. And so that's where he's moving with this, is that we get the head, the ego, the home of the ego out of the way, and then the heart begins expressing God, our divinity. So that's where he's talking about. He says, by behavior, we do not mean a particular way that you ought to behave. That's this stuff. But rather the natural expression of yourself. That's this stuff, the heart stuff. We emphasize straightforwardness, right? No complicity. That's guilelessness. We know in the gospel, Sri Ramakrishna, he's constantly praising people who are guileless. People who are guileless, they're very trusting, very open, very kind, no calculation going on, no hidden agendas. They're not trying to manipulate the situation. They're just very straightforward, very, very, very open people. And so he's saying we emphasize this straightforwardness, this honesty of being is what it is, where you're living spontaneously from your true self. So nothing is calculated in there. If you feel love, you express that love. You feel compassion, you express that compassion. There's no fear, no defensiveness in you. You should be true to your feelings and to your mind, expressing yourself without any reservations. This helps the listener to understand more easily. When you listen to someone, you should give up all your preconceived ideas and your subjective opinions. Wow, I'm going to read that again. That's amazing. Listen to that. That's beautiful. When you listen to someone, okay, we should do that all the time. But when we listen to someone, you should give up all of your preconceived ideas, right? Don't project the meanings on what they're saying. Listen to them. And your subjective opinions. Get rid of your own opinions. I watched an NPR, one of those times where I was driving back from the grocery store, listening to NPR, and I sat in the parking lot there in DC in front of the temple, listening to this talk on NPR on listening, on active listening. And it was a woman talking about it, and she said that it was amazing to her that listening is such a vital part of life, such a vital part of society. And she says, and yet most of us go through almost our entire life and we never get a single class on how to listen. And she says it's fundamental to living. And so she says there is a study of listening. There is a proper way of listening. There is an effective way of listening. And so she was teaching it. And one of the things that she said is one of the, I had to laugh out loud because it was so my experience. It was embarrassing. She said, most of us, when we listen only long enough to formulate our response. And once we've formulated our response, we just sit there wait for them to finish their noise so that we can interject our response. And she said, you know, that's normal listening these days. Like, we just listen long enough to know what we're going to say back, and we say it back, and then that just keeps going. And we aren't really listening to hear the inside of that person's mind. We're listening to present our ego. You know, that's why we're listening. And so she started teaching all of these means, like active listening, where you listen to what somebody says and then you repeat it back to them. So what you're saying is such and such and such, and all you do is repeat it back. And she says, if you do this with somebody, where you listen to what they say, you repeat it back to them in your own words, right? And then they correct you if there's something needed or different, or they add to it or whatnot. She says, if you do that within 3 sentences, you will be having one of the most intimate conversations of your life with somebody. So try that. You know, it's called reflective listening. It's like, so you sit there, listen to what they say, and then just repeat it back in your own words and say, is that what you mean? And that gives them the opportunity to color it, to give more information. And then once you have the whole package, then you can honestly respond. It's not an ego game. You know, it's not a dance of let me tell you what I know. It's a moving toward understanding, a moving toward what is understanding. Understanding is really unity. So when we move toward understanding someone, we're moving toward unity with that person. We're beginning to see their mind. We're beginning to experience the oneness, you know, in there. And that's how we move forward in an argument, not by making our points, but by hearing, understanding. And that breaks down so many of the barriers of argument, because people who are being listened to aren't threatened. They aren't pushed into an ego defensive state either, you know. So it's really it's really a big avenue, and we as spiritual seekers should be amongst the best listeners in the world, you know, because we can really move our ego aside and sit down and really do that investigation. So here he's saying this, he's telling us this exactly. When you listen to someone, you should give up all of your preconceived ideas and your subjective opinions. You should just listen to him. So just listening means you've got nothing going on up here. You're just receiving everything that they're saying. And you're waiting till you get it all before you begin processing it. You know, just listen to him. Just observe what his way is. We put very little emphasis on right and wrong and good and bad. We just see things as they are with him and accept them. Okay, this is another beautiful, beautiful, beautiful insight here. So when we're listening to somebody, when we're listening to them, we're not judging whether what they're saying is right or wrong or good or bad. We're just listening to understand. We want to see and hear it as it is from them, from their world. You know, we put our own ideas aside, we put our own cogitations aside, we put our own opinions aside, we put our own assumed understanding of what they're saying aside, and we just listen. It's very much like meditation. You know, in meditation, you're just listening. You're listening to the divine spirit within. You're listening to the divine emotion. You're listening to the source of divine love. You know, we're listening for that internal natural wisdom that is our nature. You know, so it's a world of silence, because we've turned ourselves into a receptive ear to the universe. And when we sit and converse with brothers and sisters, it's the same way. We're sitting in their presence, in the divine presence there, and we're listening oh so carefully, oh so heartfully, you know, to hear and to understand and to be at one with them in mind also. So we open to that. So we just see things as they are and accept them. This is how we communicate with each other. Usually, when you listen to some statement, you hear it as a kind of echo of yourself. This is what we're talking about. When you're listening egotistically, You're just sitting there waiting for your performance. What's your next delivery going to be? You're not practicing oneness. You're not experiencing oneness. You're experiencing your ego, an exchange. Usually when you listen to some statement, you hear it as a kind of echo of yourself. You are actually listening to your own opinion. Is that not true? You see, you're listening to what they're saying, but you're more engaged in your own mind with what you think about what they're saying. So you're not listening to them, really. You're listening to your own echo, your own ideas, or your own reaction to what they're saying. And that's what you're interested in. And that's what you bring into the conversation normally. That's not the point of conversation. That's not the point of listening. The point of listening is, who cares what you think? Understand what the thinking is with the person you're listening to. Understand their world. Get enough information to sit next to them. Get enough information to respect their opinion before you challenge it. Get enough information to empathize with them as yourself. Hear them, be with them. But actually, usually you are listening to your own opinion. If it agrees with your opinion, you may accept it. But if it does not, you will reject it, or you may not even really hear it, right? Because as soon as you come up with the idea, I don't agree with that, you stop listening. And all you're doing is kind of sitting there waiting until you can say out loud, oh, I don't agree with that point, But perhaps if you listened more, you would agree with it. Or maybe you would at least understand why that person thinks that way, instead of thinking that they're an idiot. Instead of thinking in your mind, oh God, what a moron. You actually listened and see, wow, they're a human being. They're a person like I am. They think like I do. Their thinking has led them to a different place. I shouldn't worry about just the end result, the finalized opinion. I should understand how they got there, because it might help me. It might be a valid way of thinking that got them to that conclusion. So we listen, we hear, we don't judge, we don't project, we don't egoistically perform. So if it agrees with your opinion, you may accept it, but if it doesn't, you will reject it, or you may not even really hear it. That is one danger when you listen to someone. The other danger is to be caught by the statement. If you do not understand your master's statement in its true sense, you will easily be caught by something which is involved in your subjective opinion, or by some particular way the statement is expressed. You will take what he says only as a statement, without understanding the spirit behind the words. This kind of danger is always there, right? It's actually normal. It's normal, because without careful consideration, we act and live in ego, in the mind, in the changing world. That's where we put our center. And if we put our center in the changing world, then this is the danger we're in. We're not able to communicate. We're not able to empathize. We're not able to truly hear. We're not able to be truly present, because the things in the mind are always behind the present. It takes time for them to react. It takes time for them to consider the moment. It takes time for them to project the moment for itself. So if you're actually living in ego space, you're living about a step behind the present. So you're living in the junk. If you're really present, if you turn off mind, they say, and this has psychologically been tested and proven. You can read articles on this. I have some references, which would take me 3 years to dig up, but I would do it for you if you're interested. There are articles, and you can find them online. That's where I found them, where they talk about, they have evidence that your mind makes a decision up between 1 and 3 seconds before you become aware of it. Like, they can find, when they put the diodes on the mind and measure mind, they can see the firing of your response before your awareness of your own response. That shows you, if you live in the ego mind, you're behind the times. Literally, you're literally a half a step behind reality. And so this is that practice of the presence. It's getting out of here, getting out of the echo chamber, coming here to the heart, which hears, which is present, which spontaneously knows, spontaneously deals with isness. It doesn't need the split second, of the mind to figure things out. It's a knower. It's the self, the knower of all things. It's that wisdom and knowledge that becomes yours when you learn to move from here, to that unchanging self. You have access to that knowledge at that point. So he's giving us an open invitation in the form of an open warning, saying, if you don't do this, you're in danger. You won't be living in a real world. You'll be living in your delusion, and you'll be processing your delusion constantly. You won't be transcending. You won't be able to stand above it and look down on it and see all of its machinations. Actually, that's what makes life funny.
Maharaj, isn't it kind of the same as concentration or focus?
Yes, absolutely. But it's a focus on here and now. It's an openness, true. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's concentration in the sense of maintaining that openness, not being able to be distracted in the things that are closed circuits of the mind. But it's that openness, that receptivity. Presence and openness, I think, are the same. That you are fully hearing, fully feeling, fully understanding, the present. There's no waste of projection, no waste of calculation and, manipulation. All of that goes away. Yes, it takes a lot of, that's the point of learning focus and concentration, is because it takes that discipline to keep the mind cleared, to keep the mind silent, or to keep the mind on a single thought. We encourage that in Vedanta. We encourage Vedanta doesn't like the idea of an empty mind, because Christianity also doesn't like that. Christianity says if you clear out all of the demons from your mind and you don't put anything in there, he said the demons are going to move back in and bring their friends. So don't do that. If you clear out the old junk in the mind, move the beloved in there, move the presence of pure love in there, move the presence of wisdom in there, so that you don't have a vacant apartment for the squatting minions of delusions that are just waiting for a place to live. So keep the mind occupied with pure love, always coming to the feet of the divine, and that will maintain the cleanliness and the quietude of mind, right? It is difficult to have good communication between parents and children because parents always have their own intentions. Why only parents? We all have our own intentions. We all have an idea. Usually conversation starts because we're trying to get somewhere. You should be aware of that. You should be aware of that, because that's not really communication, right? And so be aware of your intentions and determine, are these divine? Are they helpful? Their intentions are nearly always good, but the way they speak or the way they express themselves is often not so free. It is usually too one-sided and not realistic. We each have our own way of expressing ourselves, and it is difficult to change that way according to circumstances. If parents can manage to express themselves in various ways according to each situation, there will be no danger in the education of their children. This, however, is rather difficult. Even a Zen master has his own way. When the Nishiyari Zenji scolded his disciples, he always said, "Go away." One of his students took him literally and left the temple. But the master did not mean to expel the student. It was just his way of expressing himself. Instead of saying, "Be careful," he said, "Go away." If your parents have this kind of habit, that would be a bad habit for a parent, to tell your kids to go away when you mean to say, "Be careful." So if your parents have this kind of habit, you will easily misunderstand them. This danger is always present in your everyday life. So as a listener or a disciple, interesting how we equates those two, you see, as a listener or a disciple, it is very necessary to clear your mind of these various distortions, right? So we're not just practicing, this is a very low way of saying these things, but it's a truth nonetheless. So, you know, that we do our practice, not just not as a gaining idea, you know, not as a getting something, but you also practice it because it makes you a listener. It makes you a communicator. It grants you that love of oneness that makes you a true human being, a natural human being, you know, and not just an ego vessel to walk around. So if your parents have this kind of habit, you will easily understand them. The danger is always present in your everyday life. So as a listener or a disciple, it is necessary to clear your mind of all these various distortions. A mind full of preconceived ideas, subjective intentions, or habits is not open to things as they are. Wow. You know, I'm really struck by that one because you know, there's lots of junk up here. There's lots of preconceived notions. There's lots of preconceived ideas. There's lots of intentions. There's lots of desires. There's lots of calculations going on about how am I living and how's this life going to be and what am I going to do, and all of these things. You know, that's the world of desires. That's the world of lack, that world of change. And you can't be in the presence of the divine, the beloved, in a true sense, until you clear out those things, until you have a quiet and peaceful mind, until you've found and established yourself in that unchanging source of peace, that peace that passes all understanding. You know, that knowledge of the presence of the divine, which can't be captured in mind, but can be sensed by mind, can be appreciated by mind, you know. And it's the importance of the silence in your meditation when you're sitting there in the beloved can't fit in the mind. You can't think about God in any effective sort of way. So we're not trying to put a concept of God in our mind and let it roll around and make beautiful music. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to quiet the mind so that it can sense the actual presence of divinity, so that it becomes subtly aware of this amazing source of existence that we long ago stopped paying attention to, so that we can return to that, because it's through that this happens, that we have, first of all, a desire for oneness with each other, a desire for love, a desire for a manifestation and a response of love, you know, in our interaction. And that only comes, he's saying, by clearing out the mind from all of the changing world that we've established the ego in the center of, and move that here, let the mind become a tool, and not just a tool for action, but a tool for receptiveness, a tool for openness, a tool for hearing what's going on, you know, because you know, he's talking about children and families, and so we can talk about that for a second, but this is all important and necessary for everything that we do in a day. But certainly as parents, you know, I see many times parents have their way and they tell their children, this is the way it is, and the children's all broken over it. It's, you know, from the child's perspective, you're ruining my life, that's my best friend. How can you tell me I can't live with them, or can't spend time with them, or I can't go out with them, blah, blah, blah. And the parent just keeps repeating their line. They chop off all that whole world of valid thinking that the child is doing, and not helping the child reach the same conclusion that their wisdom has brought them to. They're just trying to impose their wisdom on the child, instead of hearing the child, listening to the child's love of that relationship, bringing that child forward in a way that you share the wisdom that tells you that person shouldn't be hanging out with your son or daughter. You share that wisdom by listening, by conversing, by hearing, by understanding. And that way the child feels respected. They don't feel like they have to grab onto their idea because it's under attack. They don't have to put up their barriers of defensiveness because they're not being listened to. They can feel like, wait, wow, my dad's listening or my mom's listening to me. She's actually asking me questions, and then you lead it forward. And maybe you'll come up with another solution besides just banning that friend's existence. Maybe you can come to an agreement, well, they can come over here and spend time with you, or we can go on a walk together as a family with your friend or whatnot, but I would prefer that you not be spending alone time with them. So you compromise, you hear and you listen and work through it. And of course, that's the world of ideals. And so your children will grow up perfectly and all of them will become spiritually enlightened presidents of a great country somewhere. But or not, who knows? But you will love them and they'll love you. And that's where we'll be happy. So as a listener or a disciple, it is necessary to clear your mind of these various distortions. A mind full of preconceived ideas, full of subjective intentions or habits, is not open to things as they are. That is why we practice Zazen, to clear our mind of what is related to something else. There it is. That's the key to it. You see, these towers of relationships that exist in the mind. The world is a relative world, not because that's the nature of the world, but because it's the nature of your mind. You see, time exists in mind. It doesn't exist in nature. That's why physics can't tell you what time is. Time can't be defined because it's not out there. Time is in here. Time, space, and causation is in the mind. Past, present, and future is in the mind. And so these are natures of the tool. And so we project those things on our reality. And that's what makes the world a relative place, right? The world is one without a second. That's its nature. It's our mind and our perception and our living in mind that limits us to seeing the world as time, space, causation, past, present, and future, and therefore karmic, and therefore binding, and therefore confusing, because we are a nature of singleness, singularity, oneness, love without a second. That is why we practice Zazen, to clear our mind of what is related to something else, right? Because those relationships in the mind build our delusion, one idea at a time, one wrong idea at a time, which is why we have to comb our mental hair so much. You know what I mean by that? Every time you say your mantra, you're running the comb through your mind, through the hair of your mind, trying to get the knots out. And so that mantra, which is awareness of the present, which is the presence of the beloved herself, no difference. So that mantra each time is combing the knots, brushing the knots out of the mind. So that's how we arrive at this purity of mind. That's how we get to this place of stillness, combing our mind with the mantra continually. Or like Hafiz says, he says that the mantra is like a cheesecloth, that each time we use the mantra, it's like pouring the mind through cheesecloth. The impurities get removed, right? It puts the presence in the mind and then helps you be aware of the presence that's being established in your mind. To be quite natural to ourselves and also to follow what others say or do in the most appropriate way is quite difficult indeed, because we very, very rarely are able to get to that place. If we try to adjust ourselves intentionally in some way, it is impossible to be natural. If you try to adjust yourself in a certain way, you will lose yourself. So without any intentional fancy way of adjusting yourself, to express yourself freely as you are is the most important thing to make yourself happy. and to make others happy. You will acquire this kind of ability by practicing Zazen. Now, this is an interesting little thing right here, because this is a good way to determine whether you're living an ego self or your natural self being your higher self. Because if you're living in your natural self, then true expression of yourself will make you happier and those around you happier, because that natural self is expressing love, wisdom, and existence, right? If you're living an ego self and you're expressing that, you may be making yourself happier at the moment, but it's not going to last. It's not stable. It's not lasting. And so your happiness is going to be short-lived in it, and the happiness of others is going to be short-lived in it. So we're not just throwing out the ego because it's unhelpful spiritually. We're throwing out the ego because it's the thing that makes us and our friends suffer. You know, us and our families suffer, us and everybody around us. And if you're really egoistic, my goodness, somebody doesn't even have to know you to suffer. Right? That ego can have a worldwide reach. You know, so it's something to be very careful about. Definitely learn to live in the heart, to be motivated by the love of our beloved mother alone, to just have that inner party, that inner party going on all the time, you know. You will acquire this kind of ability by practicing Zazen, by sitting in the presence of the divine. You will see these things. Zen is not some fancy special art of living, so we're not contorting ourselves into attractive pretzels. That's not our goal. Our goal is to get all the furniture out of the room. You know, so that we can express ourselves, so that we can play freely, right? So that we can play freely. Our teaching is just to live, just to get right down to the very honest expression of the moment, the expression of our divine nature in the moment. That's all we're trying to do. Our teaching is just to live, always in reality, right? Always in the moment as it is, not in our projected reality, not in all the relationships that we've projected and built with mind and thought about changing things that aren't real, not living in a dream. Yes. I'm going to mute everyone here real quick. All right. So always in reality, in its exact sense, you know, in the moment as it is, as it's happening, fully aware, fully present, fully knowing what we're expressing, you know. To make our effort moment after moment is our way. In an exact sense, the only thing we actually can study in our life is that on which we are working in each moment, right? You can only study what's in the moment. And you say, well, what if I'm a history major? Well, every piece of history you think about is brought into the present. You can't think of history in the past. So actually, history is only a description of the moment. There is no thing there to point at. Everything that can be worked on, studied, talked about, touched, tasted, heard, smelled, or conversed about has to be in the present. It is of the present. This present is the magic from which everything is pulled. It's the magic space from which this entire world is pulled in the moment. It's the container of everything. So he says that in an exact sense, the only thing that we can actually study in our life is that on which we are working in each moment. We cannot even study Buddha's words. To study Buddha's words in their exact sense means to study them through some activity which you face moment after moment. So we should be concentrated on, with our full mind and body, on what we do. And we should be faithful, subjectively and objectively, to ourselves, and especially to our feelings. So be concentrated with your full mind and body on what you're doing. That's the whole idea of this Buddhist tea ceremony. You know, it's that notion of being fully right here so that when you're pouring that cup of tea, you're not thinking about the kid in the front room. You're not thinking about, is the burner still on? You're pouring the tea. It's that practice of the presence from Brother Lawrence. It's mindfulness in the sense of Buddhism or Jnana Yoga. It's living in the presence of the beloved for the bhakti. It's being fully present always, so that you're only doing what you're doing. Multitasking is great for Windows. It's great for a Mac. Multitasking is not necessary for you. Although it's inescapable, because you're breathing and your heart's pumping and your blood's moving around and your everything's working in your body simultaneously with you sitting there spouting your wisdom, or even better, spouting someone else's wisdom. So to to be present is to be mindful, is to be fully aware of everything that you're doing. Even as I'm sitting here moving a coffee cup around and talking to you while I'm looking at a computer screen instead of the camera like I should be. Let's fix that. Chink. There we are. Now I'm looking at you. But we shouldn't be splitting around like with things like this. These things indicate a split mind, a lack of concentration. Swami Prabhupada, what a light for someone who lives in the present. He was quiet and established at all times. You would talk to him and he would look at you with those riveted eyes and see everything, every word that you're saying. And he may or may not respond immediately. It may be a few moments of more quiet before he would say something, or you would ask him a question. And, it's funny how sometimes your favorite thing about a person and your least favorite thing about that same person can sometimes be the same thing. It's a very interesting thing, because you would ask him a question, and he would always think about it. And sometimes he would think about it a long time. Like you would ask him a question and he wouldn't give you an answer for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes a month, and you never knew when that answer was going to come. And it could be it could be a question about something that had a deadline. And that deadline was never any concern to him. He was never concerned with deadlines. He would give you the answer when the answer came. And that's the way it was. And so this very, and if you have ever met him, you knew he had an enormous presence. He could walk into a room full of 20 men talking about football and silence it in less than 3 seconds. Do you know how hard that is? To walk into a room full of men talking about football and to silence it in 3 seconds? Unbelievable power. Unbelievable power. That was Prabhupada. That's what it is to practice the presence. That's what happens to you when you become fully present. When you walk into a room, your whole self, the all-existent, ever-present, unchanging love, peace, that enters the room. And that never enters the room without the effect being swept over all of the delusions going on in the room at the time. Truth, when it walks in the room, always silences the noise, always. So this is what it is to be a full and present human being, to be that hole through which the beloved mother can be seen, can be experienced by everybody who knows you. What a marvel. Oh my God, what a dream. How wonderful that would be, wouldn't it? Indeed. Oh my goodness gracious. To be a blessing like that to people and their lives. Oh, to be able to walk in and give them God just by what you are. Wow. These are beautiful things we're studying. These are beautiful, beautiful, beautiful possibilities here. Even when you do not feel so well, it is better to express how you feel without any particular attachment or intention, right? So this expression, it doesn't have a calculating, gaining idea to it, just like our practice. It's not like that, We get caught in that a lot. I find myself trying to manipulate Mother all the time, I'm always trying, to kind of tease her into doing something the way I want it done, or the way I feel like it should be done, or it could be done, you know. And it's like the toddler, the little toddler sitting there looking at you and openly trying to, get his way, but doing it in such an obvious way that the mother can only smile, but we should be aware of that and eliminate it, because it causes torture for us, and it causes others to be disrespected. When we start trying to manipulate, then we've objectified people. We no longer see them as divine. When they become tools for our way, or tools for our quest for desires, when we start manipulating them to get certain behavior from them, or a certain way of being from them, then we've stopped seeing them as divine. We've started to treat them as objects. And that having this world of relationships in the mind is what causes that. Because your brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, children, lovers, friends become objects in the mind, just like screwdrivers, hammers, and cars. They're in the same place. We should not let them be in the same place as those things. They're not there to be manipulated and to serve our way of life. They're there to be worshipped. They're there to be deeply appreciated, deeply loved, because of the presence of God within them. Even when you do not feel well, it is better to express how you feel without any particular attachment or intention. So you may say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I do not feel well." That is enough. You should not say, "You made me so." That is too much. You may say, "Oh, I am sorry, I am so angry with you." There is no need to say that you are not angry when you are angry. You should just say, "I'm angry." That is enough, right? You see, this is a very good thing he says here is you can't. One thing that we learn in Vedanta, of course, sometimes, unfortunately, it's not for many, many, many years, but one thing you learn in Vedanta is that the outside world, in truth, cannot affect you. Somebody cannot annoy you. Somebody cannot make you angry. Somebody cannot make you anything. You are fully in control of those things. That is your purveyance. That is your world. If you attach to what the person's saying, they may cause anger in you, but it's you who has attached to what they're saying. And it's you that's letting that in, and it's you that's reacting to it in anger. The world cannot affect you in your true self. And so that's what we're trying to get back to. That's what we're trying to know, so that we don't just spin in this world of change. We understand the world cannot affect me. I affect me. And so when you express yourself, you can't say, "Oh, you made me angry. I can't believe you disrespected me." What you would say is, "I felt disrespected. It really hurt me. I felt disrespected, not you disrespected me," right? Because we don't know the you. We don't know that mind. We don't know what's in here in everybody else's world. And when we blame others, we assume we know what's in there. We project our own in there on them, and we're no longer dealing with the real world. We're dealing with ideas. We're dealing with assumptions, right? So the present self knows that I'm fully responsible for my state of being at all times, that I am what I am always. I have never changed, and I never need to change in that true self, not in the ego self. Some of the egos need a lot of change, but the true self, we are established, and we know I'm unaffected by this world. This world flows around me. That's why if you talk to anybody about Swami Prabhupada for a while, somewhere in that conversation, if they're talking about him, they will call him a rock. At some point, they will call him a rock, because it was very clear that the world went around Swami Prabhupada. He was not a leaf bobbing around, being carried everywhere it went. He was the self, and the world went around him. There was a great power in that, and a great stability in that, and a wonder to be around it. All right. True communication depends upon our being straightforward with one another. That's good. That's a good pointer right there. When a conversation starts getting a little hairy, pull back for a minute, breathe for a few seconds and say, am I being straightforward? Am I conjuring a story that I'm reacting to? Or am I dealing with things one at a time in the moment as they really are, without a story, without a projected outcome? Am I being straightforward? Am I being honest? That's a very good question. True communication depends on our being straightforward with one another. Zen masters are very straightforward. If you do not understand the reality directly through your master's words, he may use his staff on you. All right. I guess I got to get one of those. What is it? He may say. Our way is very direct, but this is not actually Zen, you know. It is not our traditional way, but when we want to express it, we find it easier sometimes to express it in this way. But the best way to communicate may be just to sit without saying anything. Oh, yes, that's when you have several people around that are committed to the same ideal. You know, with Ramana Maharshi, there's many, but he's the one I'm most familiar with, and the one I have not a personal experience, but a secondhand experience. You know, talking to Swami Tamodarananda, and him saying that all of the teaching, everything he learned from Ramana Maharshi, he learned in silence. You know, Ramana Maharshi didn't give lectures. You know, he just sat there beaming. And when you were in his presence, that's all you cared about. Yeah, Swami Damodarananda said that all of his questions always evaporated. He would write them down when he was a brahmachari. He'd write down his questions for Ramana Maharshi. He lived in his ashram for 2 years with him. And he said that when he would go in for his time, his scheduled time with Ramana Maharshi to ask his questions, he said, I would walk into that room and instantly forget that I had a single question. And if I forced the issue and forced myself to remember a question, the question seems so absurdly unimportant in that moment. He said that I learned it was better just to put my questions in my pocket and to sit down and just be with Ramana Maharshi, because that answered all my questions, he says, in very different ways than I expected. So this is this beautiful thing he's saying here. The best way to communicate may be just to sit without saying anything. Right? Was that when there was I think it was, as the story goes, there were a new monastery. I think it was in Varanasi. And they were having great difficulties with the brothers there. They weren't getting along with each other. And so the Swami in charge there was, thought he was going to have to throw half the brothers out. So he invited, I think it was Swami Brahmananda. And what did Swami Brahmananda do? He just came and he says, every morning, you come and sit in my room with me for meditation. And, you know, within a matter of days, all of the problems were resolved. So you didn't have to come and hold a day-long seminar where everybody got to speak their perspective and talk about their points of view and what their agendas were and why they're right and why you're wrong and how you need to be sorry, you know, and you should apologize to this person. And, you know, that's the worldly way, and that's the way you drag in all of the relationships. You drag the whole delusion into the room with you and try and sort it out together. Certainly you will learn some things, you will grow from some things, but it won't necessarily work. But if you come in this way, where everybody's aware of what needs to come, and you just come, stop the story, stop seeing each other according to the story, stop holding all of the events of the past as being real and holding them against each other. Just come and sit in the presence together. And that unity, which is natural to us, it is our divine nature, will begin to fill the room of silence. The space allowed to it by silence will be filled with presence. And that's why we do this. That's why we do this. But the best way to communicate may be just to sit without saying anything. Then you will have the full meaning of Zen. If I use my staff on you until I lose myself, God forbid, If I use my staff on you until I lose myself or until you die, oh my gosh, still it's not going to be enough. The best way is just to sit, just to be. And this is that once again, coming back to that same echoed thing that I keep saying, that Sri, that Swami Prabhupada told me, in the light of awareness, the knots of Maya will untie themselves. Your responsibility, be in the presence. Be in the presence of your beloved. That's your responsibility. It's not your responsibility to be unselfish. It's not your responsibility to be truthful. It's not your responsibility to be nice. It's not your responsibility to fix the world. Your responsibility is to sit in the presence of the beloved, and you will be transformed. Those things will be taken care of merely because you're sitting in the presence of truth, not because you want to change, not because you know what needs to be changed. You know, that reminds me again, one of my very early multiple gurus one time scolded me for judging my own meditation. I told him, I said, oh God, I can't meditate at all when I sit down. I said, at the time I was considering not even going into the shrine because I just felt like it was more of a shame to me to go into the shrine and fail in meditation than it would be for me just to sit in my room and read a book, you know. And this person told me, he said, how dare you make such an assumption that you are of some caliber of understanding that you can correct your own homework, that you can think that your meditation was good or bad. He says, you're not responsible for your meditation. Your meditation is to place yourself in front of Mother. You have no idea. In this morning's, quote, horrible meditation, she might have clicked a switch way down deep inside that you won't be aware of for 12 years from now. But in 12 years, that switch will make the difference. And Mother switched that switch today in the meditation that you call the terrible meditation. He says, you should know only a realized soul can accurately judge a meditation. So you don't put yourself in that business. It's not yours. You sit with Mother. That's all. You sit there. She will do what she does. And she will do it masterfully, beautifully, and wonderfully in the right way. You just listen. You be present. So that's what we're going for here. You be present. You be present. Be aware of the love that you are. Be aware of the wisdom you carry. Be aware of the profundity of your existence and move through the world with that knowledge, with that light, with that divine purpose. And everything will be as it is. All right, 10 o'clock. I've only managed to go 2 minutes over. So my friends, run, fly, be free. Let's take these things to the real. And on we go. Jai Ma.
Jai Ma. Thank you. Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you.